Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. Few stories in human history have left as profound a mark on literature, theater, and popular culture as Romeo and Juliet. More than just a tale of love, Shakespeare's tragedy has become the definitive exploration of passion, fate, family conflict, and the cost of youthful devotion. It is a story that has been performed, reinterpreted, and retold in countless ways. Yet it remains as powerful and moving today as it was when it first graced the stage in the late 16th century. But what makes Romeo and Juliet such an enduring masterpiece? Why has this tragedy, among all of Shakespeare's works, captured the imagination of generations? To answer that, we must first understand not only the story itself, but also the world in which it was born, the controversies it stirred, and the ways in which it continues to shape our understanding of love and tragedy. Before Shakespeare immortalized Romeo and Juliet, the story existed in various forms, passed down through oral traditions and literary adaptations. The tale of star-crossed lovers divided by family rivalry was a familiar theme in European folklore long before Shakespeare took pen to paper. One of the earliest written versions appeared in Il Novellino by Masaccio Salernitano in 1476, where a similar doomed romance unfolds in Siena rather than Verona. Later, in the early 16th century, Luigi da Porto wrote Giulietta e Romeo, moving the story to Verona and introducing the feuding families, a pivotal element that Shakespeare would later use. In 1554, Matteo Bandello expanded the tale, adding dramatic elements that further emphasized the lovers' passion and their tragic fate. His version, translated into French by Pierre Boaistuau, and later into English by Arthur Brooke, in The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet, 1562, is considered the direct inspiration for Shakespeare's play. Brooke's version was a long and moralizing poem that warned against reckless love. But Shakespeare saw something different in the story, something more immediate, more explosive, more deeply human. Rather than treat Romeo and Juliet as a simple cautionary tale, Shakespeare transformed it into a sweeping drama filled with raw emotion, poetic beauty, and intense conflict. He condensed the timeline, making the lovers' romance even more urgent and desperate. He gave new depth to secondary characters, making them essential to the story rather than mere plot devices. And above all, he turned Romeo and Juliet into a play that explores the many faces of love, romantic, familial, and destructive. At its core, Romeo and Juliet is a play about love, but not the kind of love that is peaceful and enduring. Instead, it is love as a force of nature, violent, irrational, all-consuming. It is a love that defies societal expectations and upends the order of the world. This in itself was a radical idea for its time. In Shakespeare's England, marriage was rarely about love. It was about power, alliances, and maintaining family honor. Arranged marriages were the norm, especially among the noble and wealthy classes. Young people, particularly daughters, were expected to obey their parents' wishes. The idea that two teenagers would reject their families, risk their lives, and ultimately die for love was not just tragic, it was dangerous. The play also questioned the role of fate and free will. From the very beginning, the audience is told that Romeo and Juliet are star-crossed lovers, doomed to a tragic fate. But does fate control their destiny, or do their own choices lead to their downfall? Shakespeare never gives a clear answer, forcing the audience to wrestle with this question. The role of violence in the play is equally striking. The Montague-Capulet feud is a cycle of inherited hatred, one that the younger generation cannot escape. Shakespeare presents violence as senseless and destructive, yet also deeply ingrained in human nature. Even as Romeo and Juliet try to break free from this world, they are ultimately caught in its web. Perhaps the most controversial element of the play, then and now, is Juliet herself. Unlike the submissive heroines of traditional love stories, Juliet is bold, independent, and willing to take extreme risks for what she believes in. In a society where women had little power, her willingness to defy her parents, deceive those around her, and take control of her own fate was shocking. Even her decision to fake her death, a desperate act driven by love, was an assertion of her agency, though one that ended in tragedy. From its earliest performances, Romeo and Juliet captivated audiences. The play was likely first performed at the theater or the curtain, two of Shakespeare's primary venues before the famous Globe Theatre was built. Even in Shakespeare's time, it was a crowd favorite. Unlike many of his other plays, which gained greater appreciation after his death, Romeo and Juliet was a success from the beginning. As the centuries passed, the play remained a cornerstone of theater. In the 18th and 19th centuries, some productions softened its tragic elements, altering the ending to allow Romeo and Juliet to survive. The Victorian era, with its emphasis on propriety and morality, often portrayed the lovers as victims of fate rather than rebellious youth making their own choices. In the 20th century, Romeo and Juliet underwent radical transformations. Directors experimented with modern settings, gender-swapped roles, and diverse casts. The play's influence extended into film, with Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 adaptation becoming one of the most beloved versions, capturing the youthful intensity of the story. In 1996, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet transported the tale to a contemporary, neon-drenched Verona beach, proving that the play's themes were as relevant as ever. Beyond theater and film, Romeo and Juliet has shaped how we think about love itself. The term star-crossed lovers has entered common language, and the story has inspired countless novels, songs, and artworks. Even today, it is one of the most widely taught and performed plays in the world, its influence stretching from opera to pop music, from Broadway to the classroom. What makes Romeo and Juliet different from other tragic love stories? Why does it continue to resonate across cultures and generations? One reason is that it does not offer easy answers. The play is not just a celebration of love. It is also a warning about the dangers of unchecked passion, rigid social structures, and generational conflict. It does not shy away from the complexities of human emotions, love and hate, joy and sorrow, hope and despair. It forces us to confront the extremes of human experience. It also remains painfully relevant. The themes of forbidden love, family expectations, and the struggle against societal norms are as powerful today as they were in Shakespeare's time. Whether in the form of class struggles, cultural divides, or political tensions, the forces that separate Romeo and Juliet still exist in the modern world. Most of all, Romeo and Juliet endures because it speaks to something universal: the longing for love, the fear of loss, and the desire to be understood. It is a tragedy, yes, but one filled with the kind of passion that reminds us what it means to be alive. And so, as we embark on this journey through Shakespeare's timeless masterpiece, we will explore every twist of fate, every act of defiance, every moment of joy and devastation. The story of Romeo and Juliet is one of love and death, but more than that, it is a story of what it means to be human. Now, let us begin. In the city of Verona, where ancient grudges cast long shadows, the streets are stained with the blood of a bitter rivalry. The Montagues and the Capulets, two noble families, are locked in an endless feud, their hatred so deep that even their servants cannot cross paths without drawn swords and raised voices. This is the world in which our story begins, a world of violence and passion, where love and hatred are two sides of the same coin. The play opens on a tense morning, as servants from both houses clash in the streets. Samson and Gregory, Capulet men, swagger with crude jokes, eager to provoke a fight. When they encounter Abraham and Balthasar, Montague's servants, insults quickly escalate into bared steel. The quarrel erupts into chaos, drawing in more men until a full-scale brawl engulfs the city square. It is only when Prince Escalus arrives, furious and commanding, that the fighting ceases. With a warning voice that cuts through the din, he declares an ultimatum: any further bloodshed between these feuding families will be punished by death. Verona has had enough of their reckless hatred. As the dust settles, Lord and Lady Montague seek out their son, Romeo, who has been absent from the violence. They are troubled by his recent behavior, his melancholy, his solitude, his restless wanderings at dawn. When his cousin Benvolio finds him, Romeo confesses his torment. He is in love, but his love is unreturned. He pines for Rosaline, a woman who has sworn to remain chaste, rendering his affections futile. Love, he laments, is both pain and joy, a contradiction that consumes him. Benvolio, ever the pragmatist, urges him to forget Rosaline and look elsewhere, but Romeo is deaf to reason. He clings to his sorrow as if it were his only truth. Meanwhile, across the city, preparations are underway for a grand feast at the Capulet house. Paris, a noble kinsman of the prince, has approached Lord Capulet, seeking Juliet's hand in marriage. Capulet, though flattered by Paris' interest, is hesitant. Juliet is only 13, and though noble families often wed young, he is reluctant to rush her into womanhood. Yet, he does not refuse outright. He invites Paris to the feast that evening, suggesting that if Juliet's heart inclines toward him, their union may yet be possible. Unbeknownst to the Capulets, fate is already at work. A servant, tasked with delivering invitations to the feast, stumbles upon Romeo and Benvolio in the streets. Unable to read, he unwittingly asks Romeo for help, revealing the names of the invited guests. Among them is Rosaline. Benvolio, seizing the moment, persuades Romeo to attend not to pine for Rosaline, but to see other beauties and prove that she is not the only star in the sky. Though reluctant, Romeo agrees, his heart still captive to an unyielding love. As night falls, the Capulet household is alive with music and laughter. Within their grand halls, masked guests swirl in a dance of splendor. unaware that among them walks their sworn enemy. Romeo, Benvolio, and their quick-witted friend, Mercutio, have donned disguises, slipping into the feast unnoticed. Mercutio, ever the entertainer, is in high spirits. He mocks Romeo's brooding nature, urging him to abandon his foolish love. He speaks of Queen Mab, a mischievous fairy who invades dreams, shaping desires and illusions. His speech, light-hearted at first, takes a darker turn, revealing an underlying cynicism about love and fate. But Romeo barely listens. He is already lost in another vision, one not conjured by dreams, but by reality. For across the room he sees her, Juliet. She is a vision of beauty, her presence illuminating the room more than any candlelight. At that moment, Rosaline is forgotten. Romeo is struck, not by the painful longing of his previous infatuation, but by something deeper, something true. He approaches her, and their first words are a shared sonnet, a perfect, poetic exchange where their voices intertwine like a dance. They speak of saints and pilgrims, of lips and prayers, and in this moment, the world beyond them fades. But their joy is fleeting. Even as they steal a kiss, fate turns against them. Juliet's nurse, recognizing Romeo, pulls Juliet aside, revealing the bitter truth: he is a Montague, the son of her family's enemy. Juliet's heart sinks, for she now knows that her first love is also her greatest danger. As the night ends, Romeo too learns the truth. He is devastated. His love, barely born, is already forbidden. But the pull between them is undeniable, and though the world would keep them apart, they are already bound together by something stronger than blood or feud. As guests depart and silence settles over the Capulet house, Romeo cannot bring himself to leave. He lingers in the darkness, drawn toward Juliet's presence, like a moth to flame. Unbeknownst to him, she too is restless, and soon she steps onto her balcony, sighing into the night. It is here that the most famous words in all of Shakespeare are spoken. "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" She does not know that he listens below, hidden in the shadows. She speaks not to him, but to herself, wrestling with the cruel irony of love. Why must he be a Montague? Why must the name of her love also be the name of her enemy? If only he could shed that name, they could be together. And then he speaks. Their conversation is a fragile, dangerous thing. They are playing with fire, risking everything for a love that should not exist. Yet neither hesitates. Juliet, though young, speaks with wisdom beyond her years. She warns that if he is caught, he will be killed, yet Romeo cares not. He would rather die with love than live without it. Before they part, Juliet makes one request: if his love is true, he must prove it. Tomorrow, he must send word of marriage. Romeo swears he will, and as the first light of dawn begins to rise, they bid each other farewell, their hearts now belonging to a love more powerful than hatred. Unbeknownst to them, forces beyond their control are already in motion. Their love is a flame burning brightly, but in the darkness around them, shadows grow. And so, as the night fades into morning, the greatest tragedy ever written begins to unfold. As the golden light of dawn spills over Verona's rooftops, Romeo walks with newfound purpose. Only hours ago, he stood beneath Juliet's balcony, where whispered vows bound their hearts in love. But love, no matter how passionate, cannot survive on words alone. It must be sealed with action. Juliet has given him a task. If he is true, if his love is as deep as he claims, he must arrange their marriage. And so, driven by devotion, Romeo hurries through the streets, eager to turn their forbidden love into a sacred bond. His destination is the modest cell of Friar Lawrence, a Franciscan monk known for his wisdom and kindness. As the morning breeze stirs the leaves, the friar is already awake, tending to his small garden of medicinal herbs and flowers. He mutters to himself about the strange duality of nature, how within every plant there is both healing and harm. A flower's fragrance can delight, but its poison can kill. It is a lesson in contradictions, one that applies as much to the human heart as to the natural world. When Romeo arrives, breathless and filled with urgency, the friar is taken aback. Only yesterday, the young man was lost in melancholy, pining for Rosaline as if his very soul depended on her love. And now, with the swiftness of a summer storm, he stands before the friar declaring an entirely new love, one deeper, truer, and more consuming than anything he has ever known. At first, Friar Lawrence is skeptical. He chides Romeo for his fickleness, reminding him that only yesterday he swore his heart belonged to Rosaline. Young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes, he warns. But Romeo, undeterred, insists that this love is different. Juliet has not rejected him as Rosaline did. She loves him in return. She has offered him not indifference, but devotion. This, he argues, is no passing infatuation, but the truest love he has ever known. The friar, though wary, sees an opportunity hidden within this dangerous romance. The hatred between the Montagues and Capulets has stained Verona's streets with blood for years. Perhaps, he muses, if Romeo and Juliet are joined in marriage, their love might serve as a bridge between their warring families. Though he warns Romeo that violent delights have violent ends, he ultimately agrees to help. He instructs Romeo to bring Juliet to his cell that afternoon. There, in secrecy, he will unite them as husband and wife. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Verona, Mercutio and Benvolio roam the streets, searching for their absent friend. They are puzzled by Romeo's disappearance after the Capulet feast, and suspect that love has once again consumed him. Benvolio, always perceptive, wonders if he has gone after Rosaline once more. Mercutio, however, mocks love itself, finding amusement in its foolishness. He is the eternal cynic, dismissing romance as mere illusion, an ailment of the young and foolish. Their conversation is soon interrupted by the arrival of Tybalt, Juliet's hot-tempered cousin. His face is set with fury, for he has not forgotten the insult of the previous night. He saw Romeo at the Capulet feast, an uninvited Montague daring to set foot in his family's home. Though his uncle, Lord Capulet, forbade him from attacking at the time, his anger has not cooled. Now, with his honor at stake, he has sent a formal challenge, a duel that will decide the price of Romeo's intrusion. Before this challenge can reach Romeo, however, fate intervenes in the form of an unexpected messenger. Juliet's nurse, the woman who has raised her since infancy, makes her way through the streets, searching for Romeo. She carries a message from Juliet herself, a request to know when and where their secret wedding will take place. When she finally finds him, Mercutio, always eager for mischief, cannot resist taunting the elderly woman. He bombards her with crude jokes and playful insults, much to her irritation. But Romeo, knowing the urgency of the matter, pulls her aside and speaks earnestly. He tells her that Juliet must come to Friar Lawrence's cell that very afternoon, where their fates will be bound in marriage. The nurse listens carefully, then departs, hurrying back to Juliet with the news. Their plan is in motion, and by nightfall, Romeo and Juliet will no longer be star-crossed lovers, but husband and wife. Yet, though love guides their steps, fate has already set its own course. In the shadows of Verona, forces beyond their control are beginning to stir. Their joy, so intoxicating and pure, stands at the edge of a precipice, unaware of the darkness that looms just ahead. Juliet waits in restless anticipation. Hours have passed since she sent the nurse to find Romeo, and every moment has felt like an eternity. She paces her chambers, her heart pounding with impatience. If the nurse has returned with bad news, if Romeo has wavered or hesitated, what then? But she pushes such thoughts aside. She has felt his love, seen it in his eyes, and heard it in his voice beneath the moonlit balcony. Surely he has not failed her. At last, the nurse returns, breathless from her journey through the city. But instead of delivering the news at once, she groans dramatically, complaining about her aching bones and heavy limbs. Juliet, desperate for an answer, pleads with her to speak plainly. When the nurse finally does, her words are exactly what Juliet had hoped to hear. Romeo waits for her at Friar Lawrence's cell. There, in secret, they will be wed before the day is out. Meanwhile, Romeo stands with Friar Lawrence, his heart pounding as he awaits Juliet's arrival. Though only a few hours have passed since their fateful meeting on the balcony, it feels as though they have waited a lifetime for this moment. The friar, ever cautious, watches the young lovers with concern. He knows the power of passion and how quickly it can ignite into flame. Yet, even as he warns them to love moderately, he does not deny them this union. With solemn words, he joins their hands and speaks the vows that will bind them together. The ceremony is brief, but in those moments, Romeo and Juliet become more than just two lovers. They become one. No longer are they a Montague and a Capulet, divided by their family's hatred. In the eyes of God, they are husband and wife. Their love, so pure and all-consuming, now has the strength of sacred promise behind it. But fate is cruel, and even in their bliss, the seeds of tragedy have already begun to take root. Unbeknownst to them, the streets of Verona are stirring with tension. The summer sun beats down on the city, making tempers short and blood quick to rise. Benvolio, ever the peacemaker, senses trouble brewing. He warns Mercutio that they should leave, fearing that a fight with the Capulets is inevitable. But Mercutio laughs off his concerns. He is restless, eager for a distraction, and has never been one to back down from a confrontation. Their fears prove justified when Tybalt arrives, his face dark with fury. He is searching for Romeo, eager to answer the insult of his presence at the Capulet feast. But when he does not find him, his anger turns to those closest to him, Benvolio and Mercutio. He taunts them, provoking them into a quarrel. Benvolio urges peace, but Mercutio, never one to tolerate an insult, steps forward with a smirk. "Tybalt, you rat-catcher, will you walk?" he sneers, drawing his sword. Before the fight can escalate, Romeo appears. He has just left the friar's cell, his heart soaring with the joy of his secret marriage. But his happiness is shattered when he sees what is unfolding before him. Tybalt turns his rage upon him at once, calling him a villain, demanding that he draw his sword and fight. But Romeo refuses. How can he fight Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, when they are now family? He tries to reason with him, to end the feud with words instead of violence. But Mercutio, hot-blooded and impulsive, sees Romeo's refusal as cowardice. Disgusted by his friend's sudden softness, he steps forward in his place. "O calm, dishonorable, vile submission," he cries, and in an instant his sword is drawn. Tybalt, eager for blood, does not hesitate to engage. The two men clash in a blur of steel, moving with the deadly grace of seasoned fighters. Romeo, desperate to stop the violence, rushes between them. He throws himself between the blades, trying to part them with his own hands. But in that moment of chaos, Tybalt thrusts his sword forward, and the blow lands. Mercutio staggers back, his face twisted in shock. At first, he tries to brush it off, laughing weakly at the wound in his side. But as he presses his hand to it, he feels the warmth of blood seeping through his fingers. His laughter fades. The wound is deeper than he thought. The realization strikes him, and his expression darkens. "A plague o' both your houses." He curses, his voice filled with fury and despair. He turns to Romeo, his friend, his brother in arms, and with his final breath, he condemns the feud that has led him to this fate. Then, with a final shudder, he collapses. Romeo is frozen in horror. He had tried to stop the fight, had tried to prevent bloodshed, but his efforts have only led to the death of his closest friend. And as Tybalt stands before him, still alive, still defiant, something inside Romeo breaks. Grief turns to rage. Love turns to hatred. And without thinking, without waiting, he draws his sword. The fight that he once refused, the fight he had tried so hard to avoid, is now inevitable. Tybalt barely has time to react before Romeo lunges forward. Their swords clash, but this time, Romeo fights with the fury of a man who has lost everything. And in a swift, brutal motion, he strikes Tybalt down. Tybalt falls. The prince's decree against fighting in the streets has been broken, and the price of violence must be paid. Benvolio, shaken, urges Romeo to flee before the prince arrives. The weight of what he has done crashes down upon him, and without a word, he turns and runs. The joy of his marriage, the hope of a future with Juliet, is now tainted by blood. In mere moments, everything has changed. Fate, cruel and merciless, has begun to close its grip around the young lovers. And as the sun sets over Verona, the shadow of tragedy looms ever closer. Darkness begins to fall over Verona, but for Romeo, the city is no longer his home. Blood stains the streets, and with it, his fate is sealed. Tybalt lies dead by his hand, and though the fire of vengeance had burned hot in his heart, it has now been extinguished by the cold realization of what he has done. He is no longer just Juliet's husband. He is a fugitive, a man condemned by his own actions. Benvolio, still breathless from the chaos, urges Romeo to flee. "The prince will doom thee to death if thou art taken," he warns. Every moment they linger brings Romeo closer to the gallows. But Romeo does not move, his body heavy with grief. He had wanted peace, he had wanted love, but now he has brought Juliet only sorrow. It is only when the sounds of approaching voices fill the air that he forces himself to run, vanishing into the shadows before the weight of justice can come crashing down upon him. In the heart of Verona, word spreads quickly. The Capulets and Montagues, already divided by years of hatred, now face a new wound. Mercutio, kin to the prince, has fallen. Tybalt, the Capulet warrior, lies slain. The city is on the edge of upheaval when the prince himself arrives, his face set in stone. He demands answers, and Benvolio, ever the honest one, tells the story as it happened. Tybalt, the aggressor, slaying Mercutio before Romeo in his grief sought revenge. Lady Capulet, wild with fury, demands justice. "Romeo must not live," she cries. Her nephew is dead, and she will not rest until the Montague boy who stole his life pays with his own. But the prince, though filled with rage, does not decree death. Instead, he casts his judgment. Romeo is to be banished from Verona. Banishment. It should be a mercy, but for Romeo, it is worse than death. To leave Verona is to leave Juliet, to be torn away from the only light in his darkening world. As he hides within Friar Lawrence's cell, despair takes hold of him. The friar, wise and patient, urges him to see reason. "Be patient, for the world is broad and wide," he says. But Romeo cannot hear him. His love is in Verona, what life can exist beyond its walls. His sorrow is so deep, so overwhelming, that he falls to the floor in agony. At that moment, the nurse arrives. She brings a message from Juliet, but instead of comfort, she carries only more sorrow. Juliet, too, has been thrown into despair. Her husband has killed her cousin. Her family grieves while she alone must secretly mourn for Romeo. She weeps not only for the loss of Tybalt, but for the terror that now grips her heart. Will she ever see Romeo again? Hearing this, Romeo's pain only grows. He curses his own name, the very identity that has condemned him. In his eyes, there is no future. But Friar Lawrence, ever the schemer, refuses to let fate have the final word. He devises a plan. Romeo will go to Juliet one last time to spend the night as husband and wife. Then, before dawn, he must flee to Mantua, where he will wait in exile. In time, the friar hopes to bring peace between the families, to find a way to recall Romeo without fear of death. But for now, he must go. As Romeo departs, Juliet is trapped within the walls of her family's grief. Tybalt's death has cast a heavy shadow over the Capulet household. Her mother, believing her sorrow to be for her cousin, tries to console her with unexpected news. Lord Capulet has decided that Juliet must marry Count Paris, and the wedding will take place in just 3 days. Juliet is struck speechless. She has barely begun to understand the depth of her love, and now she is to be given away to another man. She refuses, shaking with desperation. "I will not marry yet," she pleads, hoping her father will hear her. But Lord Capulet, already enraged by the loss of his nephew, is in no mood for defiance. He sees her refusal as an act of ungratefulness, an insult to his authority. "Hang, beg, starve, die in the streets," he roars, his voice filled with fury. Juliet, his daughter, is nothing to him if she will not obey. Her mother turns away, offering no comfort. Even the nurse, the woman who has been like a mother to her, advises her to forget Romeo. "I think it best you married with the county," she says, believing it to be Juliet's only chance at security. But Juliet sees the truth. She is alone. If she cannot turn to her family, then she has only one choice left. With no one else to trust, she rushes to Friar Lawrence. Desperation clings to her like a shroud. "If all else fail, myself have power to die," she whispers. "If there is no solution, then death is the only escape." But the friar, seeing her resolve, once again begins to weave a plan. He places a small vial in her trembling hands. Inside is a potion that will make her appear dead. Her pulse will slow, her skin will turn cold, and for 42 hours, she will seem as lifeless as stone. When her family finds her, they will believe she has passed away, and she will be placed in the Capulet tomb. Then, when the potion wears off, she will awaken, and Romeo will be waiting to take her away to Mantua. It is a dangerous plan, but it is the only way. Juliet takes the vial, gripping it tightly as she returns home. The halls of the Capulet house are heavy with sorrow, but she is calm. That night, she stands in her chamber, staring at the liquid in her hands. Fear creeps in. What if the potion is poison? What if she awakens too soon, trapped inside the tomb? What if she suffocates in the darkness, alone among the dead? She shakes the thoughts away. There is no other way. Steeling herself, she drinks. The bitter taste burns her throat, but she does not falter. She stumbles to her bed, the room spinning around her, and within moments, her breath slows, her eyes close, and she is still. Morning comes, and the Capulet house is filled with wedding preparations. The musicians play, the servants hurry, and Paris arrives, eager for his bride. But when the nurse goes to wake Juliet, her joy turns to horror. The cries of grief echo through the halls. She's dead, she's dead. The nurse wails, and soon the entire household is consumed by mourning. Lord and Lady Capulet collapse in despair, the wedding turned into a funeral. The once celebratory bells now toll with sorrow as Juliet's body is carried to the Capulet tomb. They lay her among the dead, believing she will never wake again. But beneath the stone-cold stillness of death, Juliet's heart continues to beat. And though she does not know it yet, the moment she opens her eyes, fate will deliver its final, cruelest twist. The streets of Verona hum with whispers of tragedy. The Capulet household, once alive with the fever of wedding preparations, is now cloaked in mourning. Juliet, their only daughter, lies cold and lifeless in her chamber, her breath stilled, her body unmoving. The musicians who were meant to play for her wedding now pack their instruments in silence. Servants move with hushed voices, their faces pale. Lord and Lady Capulet, overcome with grief, stand over their daughter's still form, unable to believe that death has stolen her away so suddenly. In the midst of this sorrow, Friar Lawrence arrives. He has played his role carefully, ensuring that everything unfolds as planned. He sees Juliet, appearing lifeless upon her bed, and knows that she is not truly dead, only sleeping beneath the effects of the potion he has given her. But no one else knows the truth. The cries of the nurse, the despair of Juliet's parents, and the somber tolling of the church bells all signal one thing. Verona believes that Juliet Capulet has died. In keeping with custom, her body is dressed in white and carried in solemn procession through the streets to the family tomb. Mourners weep as they pass, lamenting the cruel fate that has claimed her so young, just as she was to become a bride. They lay her in the cold vault beneath the earth, among the long-departed ancestors of the Capulet line. The stone door is sealed, and Juliet is left alone in the darkness, her heart still beating, though no one knows it. But far beyond Verona, in the quiet exile of Mantua, Romeo waits, unaware of what has transpired. The day before, he had parted from Juliet beneath the cover of night, pressing desperate kisses upon her lips before fleeing the city under the sentence of banishment. Now, as he walks through the streets of Mantua, his mind is consumed by thoughts of her. He dreams of the day when Friar Lawrence will send word that it is safe for him to return, when he can hold her again, when they can begin the life they have longed for. Then, a familiar face appears before him, his servant, Balthasar. Romeo's heart leaps. Perhaps the friar has sent news. But something in Balthasar's expression is wrong. The man's face is pale, his lips tight with sorrow, and when he finally speaks, his voice is heavy with grief. Her body sleeps in Capel's monument, he says, and her immortal part with angels' lives. The words strike Romeo like a dagger to the heart. His breath catches, his body freezes. He stares at Balthasar, unable to comprehend what he has just heard. "Juliet dead," he whispers. The servant nods. The world crumbles. In an instant, all light, all hope, all purpose is ripped away. His love, his wife, his reason for living gone. His mind reels. This cannot be true, but Balthasar swears it is so. Juliet lies entombed in the Capulet vault. There is no coming back. Romeo's hands shake. His heart pounds with a terrible resolve. If Juliet is dead, then what is left for him? He cannot go on without her. He cannot bear a world where she does not exist. The answer is clear in his mind before he even speaks it. If she has died, he will die with her. Without hesitation, he turns and seeks out an apothecary, a man who deals in forbidden poisons, substances outlawed for their deadly effects. Romeo finds the shop, a miserable little place where famine has made the owner desperate. He offers the apothecary gold, more than enough to purchase a vial of poison that will bring swift death. The man hesitates, knowing the sale is illegal, but hunger and desperation overpower his conscience. With trembling hands, he gives Romeo the poison. Romeo does not hesitate. He has only one destination now. He mounts his horse and rides toward Verona, his heart set on the tomb where Juliet lies. His mind does not waver. His resolve does not break. He will see her one last time. And then he will follow her into death. Meanwhile, in the monastery of Verona, Friar Lawrence is filled with growing unease. He had sent a letter to Romeo, explaining the plan, urging him to wait until Juliet awakens so they could flee together. But as he paces in his chamber, another friar arrives, his face stricken with worry. The letter, so crucial, so necessary, has never reached Romeo. Panic seizes the friar. He realizes with sickening certainty that Romeo does not know the truth. He does not know that Juliet only sleeps. He does not know that she will awaken soon. And now, without that knowledge, he might do something irreversible. Without wasting a moment, Friar Lawrence rushes toward the Capulet tomb, hoping he can arrive in time to stop whatever tragedy might unfold. But fate is cruel, and the stars that have guided this story have no mercy left to give. As Romeo reaches the tomb, he finds an obstacle in his path, Count Paris, the man who was to be Juliet's husband. Paris has come to pay his respects, bringing flowers to the grave of the woman he had hoped to wed. But when he sees Romeo, a Montague, creeping toward the vault, his sorrow turns to fury. "You must not enter," Paris warns. "The law condemns you." But Romeo is beyond reason. He does not care for the law, for justice, for anything other than Juliet. Paris, believing him to be a villain defiling the grave of his beloved, draws his sword. Romeo, blinded by grief, does not hesitate to fight. The duel is brief, violent, and ends with Paris collapsing to the ground. As he gasps for breath, his last request is a simple one: "Lay me with Juliet." Romeo, though shaking with sorrow, grants him this wish. He drags Paris's lifeless body into the tomb before turning his gaze to the form of his beloved. There she lies, untouched by decay, as beautiful as the night he first saw her. Her cheeks still hold color, her lips are still full. It seems impossible that she is truly dead, but Romeo does not question it. He kneels beside her, pressing trembling kisses to her hands, her face. He whispers his love, his sorrow, his final goodbye. Then he raises the vial of poison. "Here's to my love," he murmurs, and with one final look at Juliet, he drinks. The poison works fast. His body grows cold, his vision darkens, and with a final gasping breath, He collapses beside her. A moment passes. Silence reigns. Then Juliet stirs. Her eyes flutter open. Her breath returns. She awakens confused but alive. She looks around, her memory rushing back. She drank the potion. She fell into darkness. And now she has awoken just as the friar promised. Romeo must be near. Then she sees him. His body lies beside her, lifeless, the empty poison vial still clutched in his hand. Realization crashes over her. Horror grips her throat. She reaches for him, shakes him, pleads with him to wake, but he does not stir. Her mind races. He was not meant to be here. He was supposed to find her alive. He was supposed to take her away. But now he is gone, and she is left alone. Friar Lawrence arrives too late. He sees Juliet awake, sees Romeo dead, and his heart fills with despair. He urges her to come with him, to flee before the city guards arrive. But Juliet does not move. She has no reason to run. She has no reason to live. Her gaze falls upon Romeo's dagger. Slowly, she lifts it, pressing the cold steel to her chest. "Oh, happy dagger," she whispers. Then, with one swift motion, she drives it into her heart. She falls beside Romeo. The tomb falls silent once more. The two lovers, separated in life, are now united in death. And with their passing, the greatest tragedy of Verona is complete. The sun rises over Verona, casting its golden light upon a city steeped in tragedy. The lifeless bodies of Romeo and Juliet lie entwined within the Capulet tomb, their love preserved in death. It is only a matter of time before the truth is uncovered, and the consequences of this fateful night ripple through the feuding families and beyond. As dawn breaks, the city stirs with the usual rhythms of life. Merchants set up their stalls, noblemen stroll the streets, and servants hurry about their errands. But in the cold silence of the tomb, a discovery is about to shatter the fragile peace. The first to arrive is the watch, drawn by rumors of strange activity near the Capulet monument. They step cautiously into the darkness and are met with a sight so shocking that one of them lets out an audible gasp. 3 bodies lie before them: Romeo, Juliet, and Paris. Blood stains the stone floor, and the unmistakable scent of poison lingers in the air. The watchman wastes no time. A horn is blown, summoning the authorities, and soon the tomb is swarming with soldiers, guards, and members of both the Montague and Capulet households. Word spreads rapidly. Lord and Lady Capulet, already reeling from what they believed was the loss of their daughter, rush to the tomb. Their wails of grief echo through the chamber when they see her lifeless body once again, this time with no hope of revival. Lord Montague arrives as well, but he is already weighed down by fresh sorrow. His wife, Lady Montague, has died of grief over Romeo's banishment. In the span of a single day, he has lost both his son and his beloved wife. Prince Escalus, the ruler of Verona, arrives in full authority, demanding answers. What misadventure is so early up that calls our person from our morning rest? He asks. He surveys the scene with grim determination, knowing that this tragedy must be unraveled. Then, from the shadows, a single man steps forward, Friar Lawrence. His face is lined with sorrow, but he does not flinch as all eyes turn to him. With a heavy heart, he begins to recount the entire story: the secret marriage of Romeo and Juliet, the desperate attempt to reunite them through the sleeping potion, and the cruel misfortune that led Romeo to believe Juliet was truly dead. He confesses his role in the plan, laying bare his actions before the prince and the grieving families. As he speaks, Balthasar, Romeo's loyal servant, adds his testimony, explaining how he brought Romeo the false news of Juliet's death. The page of Paris also steps forward, describing how his master encountered Romeo at the tomb and was slain in the ensuing fight. The truth settles over those gathered like a heavy shroud. The prince, his patience worn thin by the constant bloodshed between the Montagues and Capulets, turns to the grieving fathers. He reminds them that their hatred has led to this moment, that their children have paid the ultimate price for their ancient feud. See what a scourge is laid upon your hate, that heaven finds means to kill your joys with love. His words strike deep. Lord Capulet and Lord Montague exchange a look, one of exhaustion, sorrow, and long overdue realization. What has their enmity gained them? What honor is there in vengeance when it has left them with nothing but graves to visit? Their children's love, so brief, so pure, has become the catalyst for their awakening. With heavy hearts, the two men step forward. Lord Montague extends his hand to Lord Capulet. "Give me thy hand," he says. "This is my daughter's dowry. No more shall we be enemies." Capulet takes his hand, nodding solemnly. "O brother Montague, I give thee my hand." The prince declares that the Montague and Capulet feud shall end here and now, sealed by the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. There will be no more fighting, no more bloodshed. They will raise golden statues of their children in the city square, so that all who walk through Verona may remember the cost of hatred and the tragedy of love lost too soon. As the gathering disperses, the final lines of the play echo through the empty tomb. For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. The love of Romeo and Juliet, though fleeting, has left a mark that will never fade. Their story has ended, but their names will be remembered for eternity. The weight of tragedy hangs over Verona like an unshakable mist. The deaths of Romeo and Juliet have silenced the long-standing feud between the Montagues and Capulets, but the city is left to wrestle with the consequences. Their love, brief and intense, has become both a cautionary tale and a symbol of sacrifice. In the days following the lovers' deaths, the streets of Verona murmur with sorrowful voices. Crowds gather outside the Capulet tomb, whispering of the cruel fate that befell the young couple. The townspeople, once accustomed to the violent clashes between the noble families, now witness an uneasy truce. The Montagues and Capulets, though bound by grief, must now navigate a world without their children, a world where reconciliation comes too late. Inside the Capulet home, the echoes of Juliet's presence linger. Her chamber remains untouched, her dresses still hang in the wardrobe, her belongings scattered as if she might return at any moment. Lady Capulet, stricken with guilt, wanders aimlessly through the halls, replaying the last moments she shared with her daughter. She had urged Juliet to marry Paris, blind to the love that had already taken hold of her heart. Now she sees the truth with agonizing clarity. Lord Capulet, too, is a changed man. The stubborn patriarch who once demanded obedience now finds himself lost in grief. The daughter he once sought to control is gone, and he cannot undo his mistakes. He paces through the corridors, his mind heavy with regret. His pride, his desire to see Juliet wed to a man of his choosing, had blinded him to the depths of her love for Romeo. Now, he must live with the knowledge that his actions contributed to her demise. The Montague household is equally consumed by sorrow. Lord Montague, having lost both his son and his wife in the span of a day, struggles to find meaning in the wreckage. His home, once filled with life, is now a place of mourning. Servants tread carefully, their voices hushed, as they navigate a house that has become a mausoleum of memories. Prince Escalus, the ruler of Verona, takes swift action in the wake of the tragedy. He calls upon the families to make their truce official, to ensure that no more blood is shed in the name of old grievances. He decrees that the deaths of Romeo and Juliet shall not be in vain. Their love, though it led to destruction, will serve as a reminder to all who walk the streets of Verona. To honor their memory, golden statues of Romeo and Juliet are commissioned. The finest artisans in the city are summoned to craft figures that will stand side by side in the city square. These monuments, forged from grief and regret, will ensure that their names live on for generations. Friar Lawrence, the man who had tried to unite the lovers in secret, retreats into his monastery. Though he confessed his role in their fates, he is left to wrestle with his own conscience. He had meant only to help, to heal the wounds of division. But his plan, however well-intended, had led to disaster. The weight of his choices bears down upon him, a reminder that even the noblest intentions can lead to unforeseen consequences. Meanwhile, Paris, the young nobleman who sought Juliet's hand, is buried with honor. His love for Juliet, though unfulfilled, is recognized in death. His family mourns him, and though he was but a brief figure in the lover's tale, he too is a victim of the circumstances that unfolded. The nurse, Juliet's closest confidante, finds herself adrift. She had loved Juliet as her own child, had nurtured her from infancy, and now she is left with nothing but silence. The house she once filled with laughter and teasing is now a place of sorrow. She blames herself. Had she stood firmer against the marriage to Paris, had she helped Juliet find another way, might things have turned out differently? But regret is a cruel companion, offering no solace. In the days that follow, the city slowly begins to move forward. Life does not stop for tragedy, though the scars remain. Merchants still call out their wares in the market. The sun still rises over the river Adige, and lovers still meet in secret corners of the city. But now, when they whisper promises of undying love, they do so with the names of Romeo and Juliet in their hearts, a reminder of what can happen when love is forced to battle against fate. And so, the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet becomes legend. Their story is told in hushed voices, in poems, in songs sung by wandering minstrels. Some speak of them as foolish, reckless youths who rushed too quickly into love. Others see them as victims of a world too cruel to let them be together. But one thing is certain, their love, though brief, has left a mark that time itself cannot erase. The tale of Romeo and Juliet does not fade with their deaths. Instead, it spreads throughout Verona like a solemn hymn. Their love, once hidden in shadows, is now a beacon of warning, a lesson engraved into the hearts of those who live to tell their story. But even as the city seeks to move forward, the weight of their tragedy lingers in unexpected ways. As the Capulet and Montague households come to terms with their losses, an unspoken understanding begins to take shape between them. The rivalry that once ruled the streets of Verona has lost its fire, extinguished by the very thing it sought to control. The two noble families, bound together in grief, find themselves questioning the meaning of their long-standing feud. Was it truly honor that fueled their hatred, or merely pride? Did either side gain anything from their enmity, or had they only reaped sorrow upon sorrow? Lord Capulet, once quick to anger and eager to assert his dominance, now walks through his halls in silence. He remembers the defiance in Juliet's eyes when she refused to marry Paris, a defiance he mistook for mere disobedience. Now he sees it for what it was: desperation, a plea to be understood. He had dismissed her words, crushed her spirit beneath his will, and now he would give anything to hear her voice once more. He looks upon her childhood toys, her old letters, and wonders if he ever truly knew his daughter at all. Lord Montague, though quieter in his grief, bears a burden of his own. His wife, Lady Montague, had died not from sickness, nor from injury, but from heartbreak. The news of Romeo's banishment had drained the life from her, and now he stands alone as the last of his family. He had spent years consumed by the feud, teaching his son to hold grudges that now seem meaningless. What good did it do? What honor was there in surviving when his son lay cold in a tomb? Both men, once sworn enemies, now stand side by side as they oversee the creation of the golden statues in honor of their children. The finest sculptors of Verona work tirelessly, shaping the figures that will stand as eternal reminders of love lost to senseless hatred. The statues, shining in the morning sun, depict Romeo and Juliet not as enemies' children, but as lovers bound by fate. Their hands reach toward one another, forever outstretched, never quite touching, a tragic reflection of their lives. Though the physical war between the Capulets and Montagues has ended, the emotional scars remain. The streets of Verona, once filled with brawls and bloodshed, now echo with murmurs of sorrow. Those who once fought in the name of their lords now lower their heads when they pass the Capulet tomb. The servants who once exchanged insults with their rivals now share solemn glances, bound by an unspoken acknowledgement of what has been lost. Even Mercutio's old friends, still mourning his untimely death, find themselves questioning the purpose of their loyalty to a feud that gave them nothing but grief. Friar Lawrence, though spared punishment by Prince Escalus, does not escape his own guilt. He had hoped to unite the families through love, to bring peace to Verona with the secret marriage of Romeo and Juliet. But love, for all its power, could not bend the will of fate. He spends his days in quiet prayer, seeking forgiveness for the role he played in their downfall. Some whisper that he should have confessed sooner, that he should have stopped Juliet from taking the sleeping potion, that he should have done more. But should have is a phrase that haunts all who remain. Even the nurse, Juliet's closest confidante, is not free from the weight of regret. She had loved Juliet as her own child, had been her protector, her advisor, her source of comfort. But when Juliet was at her most desperate, when she sought a way to be with Romeo, the nurse had faltered. Instead of helping Juliet find a path forward, she had urged her to marry Paris, telling her that Romeo was as good as dead. It was the first time Juliet had turned away from her, the first time the bond between them had cracked. And now, there is no way to mend it. The Prince of Verona, standing above the sorrow-stricken families, knows that his city will never be the same. He had allowed the feud to continue for too long, had given too many warnings without action. He had lost Mercutio, a kinsman, and Paris, a nobleman who had sought to wed Juliet in good faith. The streets of Verona had been his to govern, but he had failed to prevent the tragedy that unfolded beneath his rule. Yet, As time passes, the story of Romeo and Juliet begins to shift from a present grief into a legend. Minstrels craft songs of their love, poets write of their tragic fate, and the name Romeo becomes synonymous with passion that defies the odds. Young lovers whisper their names under moonlit balconies, and those who once scoffed at love now find themselves haunted by the tale of two souls who died for it. The city of Verona continues, as all cities must, but it carries a lesson within its walls, a reminder of what blind hatred can destroy. The feud may have ended, but the memory of Romeo and Juliet will never fade. Their love, their loss, and the price they paid will live on for generations to come, a story of woe that no one will ever forget. Time does not stop for grief, but in Verona, it moves differently now. The city breathes with a quiet sorrow, the air thick with the weight of a love story that ended too soon. No one speaks of the feud as they once did. It is no longer a source of pride, nor a cause for bravado. The Montagues and Capulets, whose names once commanded either fear or loyalty, now carry only the stain of tragedy. Their children, lost to the relentless grip of fate, have left behind a legacy neither family had ever intended. The golden statues of Romeo and Juliet now stand in the city square, their outstretched hands a frozen testament to love interrupted. Those who pass by linger, gazing upon the faces of the young lovers, their expressions carved with both hope and sorrow. Merchants and travelers whisper their names as they go about their business, and children, once raised to despise the opposite house, now ask their parents why the feud began at all. And when no answer is given, the lesson is clear. No reason, however old, is worth the cost of two innocent lives. The Montague home, once filled with life and movement, is a house of mourning. Lord Montague, now a solitary figure, walks the halls where his wife once sat and his son once laughed. His servants tiptoe around him, unsure of how to address a man who has lost everything. Though the enmity between the houses has ended, peace brings him no comfort. The silence of his home is a reminder of the son who will never return. At the Capulet estate, grief takes another form. Unlike Montague, who mourns in quiet despair, Lord Capulet has taken to frenzied action, throwing himself into the city's affairs, seeking anything to fill the void left behind by Juliet. He attends council meetings with an energy that borders on desperation, his mind racing with tasks, repairs, and political matters. But no amount of work can silence the voice of his daughter. No distraction can erase the image of her lifeless body in the family tomb. Lady Capulet, whose love for Juliet had been masked by formality, withdraws into herself. She rarely speaks, rarely eats. She watches her husband move through his tasks with a heavy gaze, as though waiting for him to acknowledge the truth neither of them can escape. All their plans, their ambitions, their notions of status and marriage were meaningless in the face of love and death. The nurse, once the heart of the Capulet household, now finds no place for herself. The girl she had raised since infancy is gone, and with her, the purpose that gave her life meaning. The laughter that once filled the halls is absent, and the absence is unbearable. She wonders if she could have done more, if she had defied Lord Capulet's demands, if she had stood by Juliet in her refusal to marry Paris, if she had truly listened to the desperation in her voice. But regret does not change the past. Friar Lawrence, despite his role in the tragedy, is neither condemned nor exonerated. Prince Escalus has heard his confession, and though the friar's choices contributed to the lover's fate, his intent was never malicious. He had sought peace where there was war, love where there was hatred. But his plan, carefully laid, was undone by forces beyond his control. Now he retreats to his monastery, seeking penance not from the law, but from God. He prays for forgiveness, but more than that, he prays that the story of Romeo and Juliet will not be forgotten. Paris, the noble suitor who had sought Juliet's hand, lies buried with honor, though his name is barely whispered in the tale that unfolds. He had loved Juliet in his own way, had sought to be her husband with genuine devotion, yet his role in the tragedy is overshadowed by the greater love that consumed her heart. Still, his family mourns, and Verona, though primarily consumed by the loss of the two lovers, does not erase his name from memory. Prince Escalus, ruler of Verona, carries the weight of failure. He had warned the families, had issued decrees to end the fighting, but his words had fallen on deaf ears. He had lost Mercutio, his kinsman, and now he had lost the two children whose deaths might finally bring peace. He stands before the statues, contemplating the cost of the reconciliation he has long sought. Was it worth it? Was this the only way the feud could have ended? The answer eludes him, but the lesson does not. Power alone cannot quell hatred, nor can laws force hearts to change. The change must come from within. And so, Verona continues, but it is a different city now. The feuds that once defined it fade into history, and with them, the old ways of thinking. Romeo and Juliet did not live to see the peace they longed for, but in their deaths, they achieved what no living person could. Their love, their tragedy, has reshaped Verona, turned enmity into mourning, and mourning into reflection. Their story will live on, not just in the golden statues, nor in the songs and poems that emerge, but in the hearts of those who remember them. Their names will never be spoken in hatred again, but in sorrow, in reverence, and perhaps in hope. Hope that the next generation will not repeat the mistakes of the past, that love will no longer be a casualty of pride, and that Verona will never again allow its children to pay the price of its conflicts. As the days pass and the city begins to heal, one thing becomes certain: Romeo and Juliet did not die in vain. Their love, though brief, left a mark upon the world, one that will never fade. As time moves forward, the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet settles into the bones of Verona. The golden statues stand as reminders of love lost, but they are also symbols of change, of a peace that came at too great a cost. The streets that once echoed with the clashing of swords now hum with the quiet murmur of remembrance. Those who once fought under the banners of Capulet and Montague now walk side by side, their rivalry reduced to nothing but whispers of the past. The feud is over, but its scars remain. The Montagues and Capulets, once bitter enemies, are left with nothing but grief. Their losses have stripped them of their pride, and in its place is a hollow realization: all that they fought for, all the hatred they held, was meaningless in the face of love and death. They have gained nothing but empty houses, silent halls, and the knowledge that their stubbornness cost them their children. Lord Montague, broken by the death of his son and wife, withdraws from public life. Lord Capulet, once so determined to control Juliet's fate, now finds himself with no future to dictate. The rivalry that defined them has ended, but but so too has the very thing that gave them purpose. For the people of Verona, Romeo and Juliet become more than just names. They become a cautionary tale, a whispered legend passed down through generations. Young lovers visit their statues and speak their names as if invoking some ancient magic, while elders tell their story with shaking heads, warning of the dangers of unchecked hatred. The city, once divided by violence, is united in sorrow. Even Prince Escalus, the ruler who had tried to keep order, stands in quiet reflection, wondering if his actions were too little, too late. The tragedy does not belong to Verona alone. It spreads beyond its walls, taking on a life of its own. Poets write of love so deep it defies reason. Playwrights craft stories of passion entwined with fate. And soon, Romeo and Juliet become the very embodiment of star-crossed lovers. Their story, though born from personal tragedy, grows into something far greater, a timeless narrative that speaks to the human heart. And so, the tale of Romeo and Juliet is not merely one of loss, but of transformation. It is a story of how love, even in death, has the power to change the world. The families that once warred now stand together, bound not by blood, but by shared grief. The lovers, though gone, live on in the hearts of those who hear their story. Their love was brief, but its impact is eternal. The significance of Romeo and Juliet in literature. Romeo and Juliet stands as one of the most enduring works in literary history, transcending its Elizabethan origins to become a universal symbol of love, fate, and the consequences of human folly. Shakespeare's mastery of language, his exploration of youthful passion, and his ability to weave tragedy with poetic beauty make this play a cornerstone of world literature. At its heart, Romeo and Juliet is a story of love against all odds, but it is also a critique of the society that surrounds it. Shakespeare exposes the destructiveness of family honor, the recklessness of youth, and the rigid structures that dictate human lives. Through its characters, the play questions whether love can truly overcome the weight of history, and whether fate is kind or cruel. The themes of impulsiveness, misunderstanding, and the tragic consequences of miscommunication remain deeply relevant in any era. Over the centuries, Romeo and Juliet has inspired countless adaptations, from stage performances to operas, films, and modern retellings. Each new generation finds something fresh in its lines, whether it be the intensity of first love, the dangers of unchecked rivalry, or the heartbreaking reality that love and death are often entwined. From classical theater to contemporary settings, from West Side Story to modern films that reimagine Verona in different cultures, the story continues to evolve, proving its timelessness. What makes Romeo and Juliet so powerful is not just its poetic beauty, but its ability to speak to the deepest emotions of the human experience. Love, loss, hope, despair. These are feelings that transcend time. Shakespeare does not just tell a story, he captures the essence of what it means to love so deeply that even death cannot erase it. In the end, Romeo and Juliet is more than just a tragedy. It is a lesson. It is a story that warns against hatred, celebrates the power of love, and reminds us that even in the darkest moments, love has the ability to change the world. And as long as there are lovers who dream, as long as there are hearts that yearn, their story will never truly end.